So actually he asked me for a fun fact, and the only thing I could come up with was that I actually had, in my night talk, I actually had a sixth myth that I didn't talk about, and that was the one about surfing. So yeah, I used to surf, I swear. It's not that I'm a sort of a negative Nelly. You know, yesterday I talked about all of the myths of startups. And today I want to talk about, well, how does innovation programs fail? So we've learned a lot of things about what works, I think. And hopefully you sort of have some ideas around the progress that you can make. But my company, Moves the Needle, has done work with over 50 innovation programs, 50 different companies. And I guess the maybe not so big secret is a lot of those were failures. And so I actually wanted to point out what some of those are in the hopes that we can avoid some. And so I have some tips on how we might be able to avoid some of those failures. And I'm not going to sort of shout at you like I did yesterday. We're going to be a little bit more mellow today. But so issue number one is this innovation living in the wilderness. And often this is done by a lab. We start an innovation lab and we co-locate it somewhere else away from the company because ideally, if they do in fact come up with an idea that competes against the existing business model, you don't want them sitting next to the core business. But often, this lab or these early innovation programs are sort of the poor stepchild of the company. They're often not well funded. They don't often get the sort of the rock stars in there. And why is that? And part of the problem is that we don't define innovation inside of the organization. So over the last couple of days, everybody's running around. We're all talking about innovation this and innovation that. And I've done these presentations before where 5 minutes before I walk on stage, I cross out the word innovation all across my slides because I think it actually confuses the matter. And so I think the problem is that what do you understand what innovation means for your company? Why are you innovating? When you talk to other people inside your organization, does everybody agree what the term innovation means? Do you actually stop and define it? Does it mean new technology? Does it mean creating patents? Does it mean running marketing campaigns? There's a famous car commercial in the United States where cars driving down the road and thousands of pieces of paper are flying off of the car, and each piece of paper represents a patent. And, they're like, we're the most innovative car company in the world. We've just figured out how to add the 13th cup holder to the inside the car. So it's defined multiple ways by multiple people, and a lot of people just don't feel like that's their job. It's not my job to do innovation. So the first thing you have to understand is your why. And so in our roundtables today, we're talking about how do you get senior leadership buy-in. And the first step for you understanding the why is to actually ask leadership, why are we doing innovation at all? What is the objective? We worked with companies that their goal was to double revenues in 2 or 3 years. And this is $1 billion company. So do they really need innovation, or can they just launch existing products into new markets? So it's important for you to understand and for actually to do empathy work inside of your organization to understand why people are talking about innovation from the first place. What is it that they're hoping to gain, and what is the time frame that you're supposed to achieve the results? So that's issue number one. Issue number two is, and we've heard a lot of talk about this actually the last couple of days, is that we see innovation as this duality. It's a dual operating system. We have to do the search and the execute. And there's some truth to that, right? So inside of our organizations, we're optimized for execution. And that's how we became big, successful companies. And we manage people to be able to execute on these known blueprints in these known markets in order to continue the revenue or continue the growth. And then, the startup world, they are optimized for search because they don't really know what the market is or the problem is. And so that's great. It's true. You have to work differently inside of you have to work differently based upon whether you're sort of in this execution or this search mode. But I think, sort of the mistake is that we believe that those are two distinct parts of the organization. And so most organizations then optimize themselves around really execution, and they give this little sliver to this innovation, to this search mode. And I want you to think about it a different way. So the real issue that we're trying to solve for is uncertainty. Uncertainty is a continuum. You can't divide the company up into places where we have lots of uncertainty and places that we don't have any uncertainty. So if you look at your existing trajectory of your products that you have in market, imagine this is sort of the top of the S curve. So the white line is sort of the top of the S curve of your existing products. You maybe are reaching the pinnacle, and the revenues of those products are going to start to go down. But perhaps the objectives, the strategic priorities that leadership has, is to continue to grow. So even in the near term, even in year 0 and year 1, we have certain objectives that we need to reach. We have the existing revenues of our products that maybe we know what the numbers were last year. We know that if we work harder or we increase efficiency or productivity, that we can gain a few percentage points based upon last year. But there's still likely a gap of uncertainty between what we know we can execute on this year and what our strategic priorities are. The whole point about this known versus unknown and this search versus execute mode is that you have to operate differently when you face uncertainty. If you try to just execute, if we try to just work harder in order to solve for uncertainty, we're most likely to fail. So that means that even in year 0, year 1, we face uncertainty, and if we just try to execute harder, we're going to fail in achieving those objectives. So sort of thinking back to slide 1, what do you think that the uncertainty is of the leadership, and what do you think is actually concerning them right now? It's that uncertainty in year 0 and year 1. So no wonder they're not funding the innovation programs. Right? So if they think that innovation means building new technology, why would they be worried about new technology if they can't hit their numbers this year? So I actually encourage you to even not use the word innovation. When you do empathy work for your senior leaders, don't even use the word innovation. Use the terms laying the foundation for future growth. So as you can see, if you get into years 3, your uncertainty is greater. And when you get into years 5 and 6 and 7, you have massive amounts of uncertainty. So the amount of search work you do when you're doing 3, 5, 6, 7 years is a lot more than you're doing in year 0, year 1, right? And that's what you want to get to, and that's what you're calling innovation. But the first thing that you can do is actually use these principles to solve the near term, to have more immediate impact in order to justify the existence of this future work. And instead of talking about innovation, talk about laying the foundation for future growth. And the more that you can have those conversations around growth, then it doesn't really matter. I think that the maturity of companies that are learning to work in this new way will be determined by, we'll stop talking about innovation programs and we'll simply talk about a new way to work inside of our organization where we always face down any amount of uncertainty using what I call the 3 E's of lean innovation: empathy, experiments, and evidence. So wherever we're facing the unknown, we're going to go and understand our constituents or our customers or our internal customers deeply. And we're going to run experiments to validate or invalidate the assumptions on how we solve their problems. And we're going to use evidence to make decisions. So issue number 3 is this idea of impact versus culture. So there's some pretty well-known programs that have sort of been dismantled recently. And one of the reasons is there was this battle internally around who owns quote unquote innovation. And is it the innovation team? And then the innovation team starts talking about the need to change culture, and HR goes, no, wait a second, HR owns culture. And so then there's this battle around who's going to solve the issue about training people and about building this new culture. And in this particular instance, HR kind of won the argument, and there was less concentration then on actually driving home impact that would sustain the program, right? So fundamentally, if we go back to the empathy that I was just talking about, if your leaders are trying to solve problems in year 0 and year 1, and yet your innovation program is concentrating on changing the culture, it's not going to last if you're not able to solve those problems year zero, year one. So there are other battles that we see, and this is just extraordinary to me. Other battles that we see inside some organizations is people trying to own sort of what I call the entrepreneur spirit. They're saying the agile people, no, we have to be agile. It's not about design thinking. And the design thinking people are saying, no, it's all about empathy. It's not about agility. And there's actually these wrestling matches inside of the organization about what they're going to call the way people are working. So we talk about lean innovation as being this sort of this combination of agility and design thinking and lean startup tailored for the enterprise. But it doesn't matter what you call it. So the idea around organizations getting to the point that they brand their innovation program, right? So there's ING's PACE program and GE FastWorks and Intuit Design for Delight. Humana calls it Fast Start. American Family calls it Ignite. The whole purpose of branding it is to remove the wars around what are we going to call the specific actions that people are going to take. Eventually, what you have to do is take all of this learning of this empathy or the experiments or design thinking or human-centered design, whatever you're learning, you define what it means to act like a startup or to act entrepreneurial. What is the behavior you're going to have inside your organization to face down this uncertainty, and then brand it yourself. And get away from the sort of these religious wars around, what is the flavor of the day. Eventually, lean startup is probably going to move into something else. Eventually, design thinking will stop being a buzzword and people will just know how to do empathy work, perhaps. But there's always going to be new trends. And if people are sticking around and concentrating on what we're calling this stuff, then it leads to the political infighting and it leads to people sort of grabbing and trying to be ownership of this. And if you can just define what you all mean by entrepreneurial spirit or how you're going to face down uncertainty, you'll be a lot more healthy. So issue 4 is sort of this concept of a top-down program versus a bottoms-up. I believe it has to be a combination of that. That's why I have the crabs. It's actually a pincer move. How you get started is typically the way that it works I've seen is you get started by finding the people that act entrepreneurially inside your organization already. So people that maybe have a startup background or are doing a startup on the side or entrepreneurially minded, or you look to the design thinking people inside the building or the agile developers, but people that sort of already get this iterative method and this method that involves interacting with employees. And to me, that's a great place to start, but it's obviously only going to go so far until you get senior leadership has to buy in, and that's the only way it's going to progress. Other organizations have tried the top-down approach where a CEO says, no, we must move faster. We must be more agile. We must be able to incorporate new information from the market and change our plans. And oftentimes these senior executives believe that by doing this sort of clarion call that suddenly everybody in the organization is going to go, marching off and act entrepreneurially. And of course, that never happens, right? And so, yes, you have to get started in a particular place, but then you have to figure out how you're going to get the other half of that pincer to work in concert for the true traction to ever happen. And so we have seen these instances where it's one way or the other, and they make certain amount of progress, and then it dies because it doesn't have its counterpart. And sort of not to diss the middle managers of the world, they actually are not incentivized properly to adopt these startup principles, but they're typically going to be the last ones to change, and they're typically going to wait to see if there's actually impact made, and they're going to wait to see if this lasts out, right? They've been inside the company for ages. They've seen these programs come and go to the point now they're just going to go like, well, I'm just going to see if this works, because if I just sit here and wait, I think everything's going to go back to normal in a year or so. So, pincer move. The other part of that is the top down, making a clarion call, we must act bolder, has to be backed up by this empowerment, this sense of safety that people are allowed to work that way. if you just try to get people to act bold and you don't give them the time and the space and the resources, then people are operating in fear. They're not acting boldly. They're not actually being innovative. And so again, you can find the people that are working in a particular way, but they're not going to work that way, even if they know how to do it, if they don't feel like somebody has their back. And so this is the pincer move again. So issue number 5, we heard earlier about some vanity metrics. So we also see vanity metrics in the transformation program itself. And it's a tricky thing. One of the hardest things in the startup world, let alone the corporate innovation world, is what are the right metrics to track? So people talk about it all the time, but it's very easy to start tracking vanity metrics when we're talking about the program itself. Oh, how many customers have we talked to? How many experiments have we run? How many people have been trained, right? So there's these programs that are out there that are super aggressive. We're going to conquer the world, and in 3 or 4 years, 50% of the people are going to be acting in this new way. And the way we're measuring the progress is how many people have gone through training. Well, what's actually their behavior? So it's hard to do, but what we actually need to do is learn how to measure behavior that indicates that the transformation is already happening. And so this is a tough thing to crack, but you have to start thinking about how that works. And so in my book, The Lean Entrepreneur, we talk about the value stream. This is how we were applying this to startups, but it can be applied to the transformation program itself. And so if you think about your internal customers, like if you have a full transformation program going and you have practitioners and you have coaches and you have leadership that is acting as a growth board perhaps, and so they're acting like investors, right? And they're the ones that are choosing which programs get funding. Each of them will have their own path from awareness to passionate. And so for each one of these states, what we want to think about is, what is the behavior that practitioner or that coach exhibits that indicates that they're in a particular state? What do I have to do as a program designer or as an innovation person? What do I have to do in order to get that coach or that leader or that practitioner to be in that state, to exhibit that behavior? And how can I measure that? And if you're able to figure this out and then share those type of metrics with senior leadership, they're going to understand that the transformation is actually happening. And it's not just that we're doing an activity over and over again. So the one thing that's confusing about this is that you don't start with awareness. You actually start with satisfied. So if you already have a program and you're trying to scale it, then you can look in the section that would be really around the marketing funnel, so awareness through trusting. But most people that are early in the stages need to be working on satisfied. So this is sort of the minimum viable product of your transformation program, such that practitioners, coaches, senior leaders, C-suite are satisfied with what the program is doing. So what are the behaviors that those different market segments, what are the behaviors that they're doing that indicate that they're satisfied? So senior leaders are giving challenges, right? So they're submitting challenges that they would like the innovation teams to tackle. Coaches or new people are signing up to be coaches. Coaches are signing up to do more accelerator cohorts. Think about it. What is the behavior that indicates that they're involved in the program and that they want to see it? And that's sort of the beginning part. You hypothesize what percentage of them or how often it is that they exhibit this behavior. You do an activity like your workshops or acceleration cohorts or whatever it is that you're doing to try to expand this, and you measure to see whether you're seeing that. So you're acting like a startup where your customers are internal inside the company. So you have to be fancy with the remote. So like I said, you're acting like a startup. Empathy, experiments, and evidence are the 3 E's of lean innovation. And the steps that then you need to take, right? So you've understood the empathy, the why. Now you must articulate the vision of what you imagine that the program is going to encompass. You understand that this is the objectives that we're trying to achieve. You create the roadmap on how we're going to achieve it. You have to define what your entrepreneurial spirit is in terms of the behavior, the empathy work, and the experiments and the evidence, lean startup, design thinking, human-centered design, whatever those activities are. You have to find your internal champions that are ones that are going to act like the coaches and the mentors that are going to drive the program. That's likely you all. Then you learn how to accelerate it and bring it to other groups inside of the company, whoever is facing uncertainty, both internal customers as well as external customers. Eventually, in order to make this sticky, in my opinion, a new structure for the company will have to emerge. Culture comes out of structure. That's why we're in this dilemma, because we're not in the industrial age anymore, but the very structure of our company was built upon the assembly line. And eventually, for this change to be sticky, we're going to reorganize, and not just reorganize, we're going to restructure the company, probably based on like a Spotify model, if people are familiar with that, but it'll be everybody in the company, not just engineering. So, a lot to digest. Happy to help out. Reach out to me if you'd like to have a conversation. Brant@movestheneedle.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brant. Thank you.